Okay, I believe we are now live. Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nick.
Hi, everyone. Real Talk Voicing the Margins is a series of curated live conversations on issues and topics of critical import to marginalized communities, including but not limited to people of color, LGBTQA, and economically disadvantaged citizens. Providing a voice and platform for often voiceless people is at the heart of the series. Real Talk is a partnership with the Woody Guthrie Center, the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, Folk Alliance International, Black Wall Street Times, and Tri City Collective. I'm Naja Amatula Hilton. I've been teaching for 8 years in Oklahoma City, and I am a founding member of the Tri City Collective and a writer and a performer. I'd like to introduce all of the panelists. I'll go in alphabetical order. Bracken Clark worked in libraries and bookstores for over 20 years, earning his master's degree in library and information studies from OU in 2010. Bracken decided to transfer his skill set out of the library world and become the director of community engagement for Tulsa Public Schools in 2019. In this role, he leads City Lab and makes connections to and strengthens existing relationships between TPS and the wider Tulsa community. In partnership with his design lab coworkers, he also contributes to TPS's high school redesign efforts. For Focus Black Oklahoma, Bracken has contributed as a segment producer and works as an associate producer on the program. In the print format, Bracken most recently provided research for the article Hell Came to Tulsa in the May-June 2020 issue of Oklahoma Today magazine, the official magazine of the state of Oklahoma. Thanks for being with us, Bracken. Sarah J. Donovan, PhD, is a former junior English language arts teacher of 15 years and an assistant professor of secondary English education at Oklahoma State University. She wrote Genocide Culture in Middle and Secondary Classrooms, 2016, and the young adult novel Alone Together, 2018. Dr. Donovan has the books and review column, was the books and review columnist for the Allen Review in 2019 and serves as a state representative and board member for the Assembly on Literature for Adolescents of NCTE. She hosts a weekly blog, Ethical ELA, and has contributed chapters to the Best Lessons series, Talks with Teachers 2018, Queer Adolescent Literature as a complement to the English Language Arts curriculum, Moving Beyond Personal Loss to Societal Grieving and Contending with Gun Violence in the English Language Classroom. Thanks for being with us, Sarah. Torie Shoecraft serves as president of the Oklahoma City American Federation of Teachers, representing Oklahoma City public school teachers as a past kindergarten teacher and mother to a 5-year-old. Torie describes herself as a lifelong learner and a strong advocate for public schools in Oklahoma. Thanks for being with us, Torie.
Thanks.
Uriah Davis is the current president of the Student Association of Global Studies. He's a recipient of the Les Martin Endowed Graduate Fellowship in Global Studies. His interests includes international relations, travel, and diplomacy. Currently a graduate student in global studies at Oklahoma State University, he graduated with a bachelor's in political science from the same university. He works as an apartment assistant for housing for international students. Let me read one more statement and then we'll get into the good stuff. We acknowledge that we gather upon the lands of the Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, and Osage, but also the many Indian nations that called this their home in the generations before forced removal. We respect their hospitality and honor their stories. So that is our acknowledgement. Thank you for letting us use your land, and we remember that as we move forward with everything. So can I just ask really quick, just like a brief, how is everybody? Like, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. How is everybody?
A little freaky outy, but it's become base level now. Like if you have I don't know, like a sore elbow after a while, you just sort of work your life around that, right? Like wearing masks everywhere, paying attention to myself, seeing if I feel sore throaty or if I feel, any kind of normal stuff, abnormal stuff, just sort of baseline freaky outy. I've got relatives that are immunocompromised, severely immunocompromised. So just high anxiety.
Yeah. Anybody else want to say anything specific?
I would say a lot of people don't like the term the new normal, but I feel like this is the new normal. So we're kind of, even though we are anxious, we're just, we have to survive. So we're moving on.
Yeah.
I'll just say I'm a little lonely.
Yeah.
Like I just miss using my body to interact with people in conversation and sitting alongside them and being close enough to smell them, even though I know that sounds kind of weird, but you know, that just human interaction, I do miss that. But
for sure. Uriah, how you doing?
It's a little bit maddening over here, but you know, I'm constantly busy with stuff, so that kind of takes my mind off of it. But yeah, just kind of getting used to mask, getting used to new policies that we have to implement here at OSU, and making sure that we can enforce them. So it's kind of flip. Hopefully it works. Flip some more. So
yeah, I completely understand. I am one of those people, Torie, who hates the phrase the new normal, because I'm like, this can't be normal, this can't be life, but maybe it is. So I have a really cute leopard print mask, and we'll just go on trucking and see how we do, I guess. All right, well, I think I'm gonna jump right in. Bracken, I'm going to start with you. With your knowledge of student needs in your position, could you quickly outline for us the big reasons why it's not easy to just say, school's too dangerous, everybody stay at home for virtual learning? Why is it not that simple to just say that?
So there's the obvious reasons, right? Like different cognitive processing abilities, different learning styles. Some people learn better by watching. Some people learn better by doing. Some people learn better like with a partner. Study groups have always been like helpful for students. I remember that. And those are sort of the easy things to point to. Students, when asked, also just really miss the social aspect of school. And, that's sort of one of the, I don't know, unadvertised parts of schooling is you learn how to be social. You learn to interact with people who are like your boss. You learn how you take your first steps towards leadership, towards community building, towards fellowship, practicing good followership, all these things, right? And it's much harder to do that in the distance environment. Though, I mean, it can be done successfully. But there's still something missing when you're not face to face, right? Like it's easy to troll somebody on Facebook when you're anonymous or on 4chan or Reddit or whatever. And it's easier to sort of do these things on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever than it is to actually be a leader in real life with real people around you. So when in City Lab, so basically City Lab, for people who don't know, which I'm sure is most people, so I'll give a quick overview. It's for 9th and 10th graders. It's funded by AEP. It's a grant funded thing. And we take students and we give them a real world problem without a solution. And we ask them to solve that. So this year it had to take place virtually. So the students came up with the problems themselves. They selected the ones and then they did the stuff. One of the things they selected was turning school libraries or libraries in general or YMCAs, the Dream Center, big spaces into places where students could meet up, socially distanced, masked, all that good stuff, so that they could have study groups, so that they could have, people like students with younger siblings whose parents work struggle in the home environment as well because they have to do their school, make sure their younger sibling is doing their school, and also like feeding, maybe changing diapers, give baths, whatever that entails. So they envisioned a place where they could go to the library and bring their younger siblings, or they would be like reading partners there to help them, or like an after op type thing. I don't know if everybody knows what after op is, but it's like an after school like set of clubs. There's like a debate club, a robotics club, like a women in science club, bike club, all sorts of stuff, so that their younger siblings could get help or schoolwork as well while they were doing study groups with city year or like student-led study groups or upperclassmen teaching younger classmen, like, writing help or whatever. So they came up with that themselves. They wanted to have a space to show up and interact with people and get help with homework. Like they didn't want to have to choose like not homework or not school or school. They wanted like a place to do a both and, right? Like they understand the need for distance learning. They were very clear about like we feel it's needed, you know, when at times or whatever, when it makes sense, like we fully support that. But we want to be able to like still have the option to meet up. So that's one of the projects they worked on, was getting volunteers and spaces. So I think that speaks like straight from the students' mouths, right? They could have solved for any problem they wanted. They could have come up with whatever they wanted. We would have supported them, but they chose that physical space, that need for physical space. So I think the TLDR is social interaction. I think makes it like not so easy just to say stay home and work. Plus, I guess the other hidden things, like I sort of started into, parents work. So it's hard for some students, older students, to take care of, you know, a younger sibling, 3 or 4 younger siblings, or what if auntie drops off a couple kids at your house because she has to work as well, and you're a teenager, so you're taking care of 6, 7 kids or whatever. It's a lot of work. So that's internet access as well. Not everybody has internet access. Hotspots are hard to come by. Last year anyway, because everybody all of a sudden needed them all, like, you know, 5 minutes ago. Huge back order. So it's, yes, there's equity issues in not having school as well in physical space. Yeah, those are some of the things that make it difficult just to say, let's do it from home. We're all good. Don't worry about it. Doing it from home. There are different calculations to work into, like, what are we losing and how do we address these equity issues and these difficulties, these barriers? How do we remove barriers to success for students in the online environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Torie, if you have anything you'd want to add to that, I know you have a child. I have a 2-year-old. I actually have told several friends this was like the one circumstance where being a teacher was convenient, because, you know, when schools were canceled, I could stay home with my kid or whatever. Like, this was the one time. But I don't know if anybody saw that New York Times article that said in the COVID economy, you can have a job or a kid, not both. And so, Torie, if you have anything to say to that, or just dealing with, like Bracken said at the end of his thing there, like, what about when parents have to go to work?
Right. Well, and I have a 5-year-old going into kindergarten, and those are the foundation years that she should be in school with a teacher, just so that she can build that love of learning. Also social. She needs to be around other kids. We are stuck at home with 2 adults. And so being an only child, especially, but for any of them, they need that social and that mental time with their peers to really grow from that. So that's my biggest concern, my biggest worry. And I really can see there being short and long-term effects of students not being in school. So it's a catch-22.
And I wanted to add from the perspective of, you know, of teacher educator, is that, you know, Oklahoma has a shortage of teachers. Mm-hmm. And how are we even going to get newly certified teachers certified and ready to get into the classroom with the proper experience working with students and working in communities and working with parents and learning how to move about the classroom and interact with everybody and meet everybody's needs when they can't do their internships in student teaching, you know? And so I feel like another concern is that we're going to be falling even further behind with qualified teachers.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't even think about that. Like, I would be losing my mind if this were my first year. Like, I just graduated. I want to go into teaching. What the heck? No, I mean, maybe I don't want to go into teaching right now. This would be horrifying.
That's one of the other. I'm sorry, Nadja. That's one of the other things too, is when we do distance learning, not everyone has parents that can help them with school, right? Mm-hmm. Parents have different levels of educational achievement, different time commitments, whatever. So it's like I know TPS is doing as best we can to help parents become like good partners in the education process when we do distance learning. Some parents, it's just not possible. That's another challenge that we face when we're talking about 100% digital, 100% distance learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember being in the spring when we had to like call everybody and do this technology survey. Do you have a computer? Do you have internet access? Do you have blah blah blah? And then we had to inform the parents and the students about what their distance learning was going to look like. And I was teaching 7th at the time, and one of my students, great student, always had her work turned in on time, great, very attentive, all of that. But when I called her mom, and her mom was great, she was like, she is a great student, but I have 6 kids. Like we're not going to be doing a lot of online schoolwork. And I was like, I understand exactly where you're coming from. I understand. And so that's a whole other factor too, and I mean, she was probably one of the luckier ones because she was able to be at home with the 6 kids. But what if my 7th grader, like you were saying, had been the oldest one with 5 younger siblings? Like, what? So we'll get more into the expectations of work and distance learning a few questions down. Uriah, tell us something. What are some of the highlights of the similarities and differences between the struggles we've just been discussing with elementary and secondary, and how that might be different for university students or for international students?
I would believe actually a lot of those coincide with university students. The only difference is they're paying for their school, and that's a big problem. I'm going to speak in general for the college at this moment, not the international, because that's a whole nother pie. It's hard to imagine all of a sudden OSU shutting down in the middle of a semester, telling the kids to go home. Now we're hoping that they have the resources. As stated before, that's not a guarantee. Oklahoma, I would even caveat America as a whole, we do not dedicate into infrastructure like we are supposed to. And this is an infrastructure problem. We're just filling in on the education side of things. It's just very intense because the current notion is now we have to get kids back to school. College-wise, it's a money issue too. Like if you don't have kids here at Stillwater going to school on site, they're losing a lot of money. They've spent millions and millions of dollars on housing that can't be taken up due to the current pandemic that's happening right now. So there's a lot of stress factors. I talk with my actual Department of Global Studies, and I just hear the constant stories of how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? Tenured professors have to immediately learn a digital environment that they were not trained. There's no training for it. We're literally flying by the coat of our tails right now. So it's a really wild situation, and everything is very stopgap right now. We don't have any long-term approaches, which is kind of overall long or short term. That's going to turn into a problem that we're going to have to address.
So so you're seeing a lot of similar, like access to food, access to, I mean, like you mentioned, they're telling people to go home, but what if you can't get home? I mean, is housing on campus still normal? And
housing on campus is not normal at this present time. Food security is always a big concern in Oklahoma as a whole. And that is a constant question that we're constantly dealing with. Like I stated before, I work for housing. So that is the first thing that's on our head, on our mind right now. Personally, and for my job, I have a bunch of international students. They don't know how to drive. Yeah. There's technically no need to drive in Stillwater because we provided them services to get to the store and back. That was just to help them do that, because actually getting a license in America is expensive. Mm-hmm. There's training and all that's $2,000 or $3,000 just to get a driver's license, something we take for granted. But look on the international side of things, now they're stuck in their homes with their children, and we provide daycare assistance and programs as part of them moving into OSU. We provide them daycare and stuff. All those programs has been digitized or they're gone. So now we have international side, we have guests that were learning English that can't learn English no more. So now there's a language barrier that they have to fight with. And outside of the community that we have created, people are not very friendly when you can't speak English, especially in a town like Stillwater. So now we have to deal with these situations on a more constant stream, and have to be more attentive of things that maybe we were kind of like, well, that fixes itself because we have a class for that. Well, now we might not, or we have to re-educate people on how to use Zoom or Microsoft Teams or programs that were never used previously that now has to be used. And then it goes into a whole other slew of issues, security issues, protecting, making sure nobody gets in. It's a stream of a hotbed of messes that we're constantly stopgapping every step of the way.
Wow, that sounds so stressful, but thank you so much for bringing attention to that, because that would have completely bypassed me. I wouldn't have thought about any of that at all. So that's very, very important to note. Would anyone, you're welcome to say no pressure. Would anyone like to give your personal opinion about whether schools are being asked to do too much? That's kind of a set of memes that goes around the internet, right? Like, oh, well, you wanted the schools to feed the kids and to do after school care and to do this and to do that and to do this, but now that we can't man those buildings because we need to say educators need to stay home to take care of our own families, now those services don't exist. I think the line that I saw was, schools were trying to solve all your problems for you, but now we can't. Does anybody feel like they want to speak to that? You don't have to, but if you want to.
I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because school here in Oklahoma and America has been propagated as a daycare. And I'm going to be just very blunt and honest about this, because I've studied abroad. I've spent years in other countries that have a much better education system that is not as catch-all as ours. We have to provide the after-school program. We have to provide this. We have to do that. The burden on just a single teacher's back is astronomical compared to other places in the world. And American politics, which I don't want to go too deep into that, but they like to not look at the rest of the world as a standard of operation. When there are people that do travel around and they're like, I've had a much easier experience in Germany. I've had a much easier experience in Finland. They deal with some of these problems, but because we have this American pride concept caked into our system as a whole, we ignore opportunities for options that we can at least look at and maybe, mix up a little bit. Teaching is a cooperation of data that we make accessible to children and students, students alike. But we seem to always miss these opportunities, and now we're stuck in this massive echo chamber that is just America. I don't even want to say religious wings. America's echo chamber will not allow us to look outside and see if there is a better or a solution that we can build upon. At least we know we can't fix this overnight. But if we don't fix it, this problem is going to hit every time any little thing happens. So.
Sarah, were you going to say something?
My concern, I'm along the lines of what you're saying here, and I think part of it is that so much of the money, attendance drives the money that goes to the schools, and then it's allocated for each school, and property taxes drive that, and it's a similar question of defunding some of that money and putting it into places like a separate social services that can use the money that they need and train the people that they need. Right now, we have a lack of social workers, a lack of school psychologists. They're not being funded. We have a desperate need for them to be students. But that the money that needs to be defunded and a separate funding for the social workers that need to do their work, and psychologists that need to do their work, and librarians and libraries and books and things like that. Those shouldn't be optional. They should be separate entities that people are making decisions with. So I think there's an opportunity to rethink the funding at this time. And I don't know what the easy solution. I mean, that's a really complicated way of addressing it, but we need to think about that.
I'm glad you said libraries because I had forgotten. I mean, I used to work for the library system in Oklahoma City a few years back. Yeah, I know, Brecken. I don't know if you've heard anything from library friends, but like libraries are closed, and it used to be that that's where people were in there every day, like filling out job applications and printing off resumes and doing, all of that stuff. And there were even, I assume this is libraries everywhere, where, homeless people would go and just spend the day because it's too hot outside or too cold outside. And now libraries are closed too. Bracken, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that.
Not specifically about libraries, but I had some notes that I took based on the conversation that's been happening. And it fits right in with what Uriah and Sarah were saying. Like schools, like teachers are asked to do so much. When schools are closed, we had to figure out a way to get meals to students, right? Mm-hmm. We had to get state approval or federal approval to be able to hand out more than 2 meals to a kid at a time. We got that, thankfully, and we were able to like give families like several meals at a time, which was great. But that's one of the things that teachers are often tasked with, is making sure students are looking healthy. Mental health issues, like when teachers don't get to see students in school, there's a bigger chance of unsafe home environments going unreported, mm-hmm. abuse or whatever. So teachers are asked to be mental health professionals, nutritional providers, so that's the teacher part, right? Like so many aspects of a child's welfare, teachers are sort of asked to be responsible for. And when Tulsa first shut down schools, it was kind of like a gallows humor, like going through Instagram and seeing my parent friends being like, I had no idea dealing with kids and teaching to learn was this hard, and I don't have any kids. So it was kind of like a very like ha ha ha, but at the same time just like appreciating like how hard it is. But it was good to see people like actually take time and be like, wow, like this teaching thing isn't just like telling a kid, here's what 1 + 1 =. It's a whole lot of other things. But for libraries, I know libraries provide like a lot of essential services, especially like outside of the major metropolitan areas. Like the Tulsa City County Library System has locations in like Collinsville and Glenpool, Sperry, so Prattville. So as you get further out, it's harder and harder to get like reliable broadband internet, and libraries provide that for a lot of students or people in general. But I know students would often go to the library when I worked in Sperry to be able to use like the internet to do stuff. Especially like this was before like students were allowed to take computers home, and even in some cases, students still aren't allowed to take computers home until the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And even some of those computers don't have webcams. So how are you like? It's just there's a whole slew of barriers that the library is uniquely qualified or situated to provide help in. And I'd understand why they're closed, but it's a sorely missed resource in the community for sure.
Absolutely. I feel like what we're kind of all saying. Sorry, Torie, I didn't mean to leave you out. I don't know if you wanted to say anything on that particular topic.
Not necessarily. I was going to agree with everyone, but funding is, I think that they are being asked to do too much, teachers and the schools, because the teachers aren't equipped and we don't have the funding to equip our schools to be able to do those things. So I think that is a problem.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to kind of summarize, I feel like what we were all saying is, I don't think that anybody who works in a school building or around a school building or even in a library would say like, we don't want to provide these resources to the community. I don't think that's the statement anybody would make. But if we're going to provide these resources to the community, we have to have enough money to do it. And sometimes having enough money to do it doesn't mean just facilities money, although we need that. It doesn't mean just food money, although we need that. Sometimes it means money to pay other people so that the teachers and the administrators can go home and other people can perhaps come into the school building or the library building and do certain services. So let's shift just a little bit into some of the more kind of technical, nitty-gritty, not fun to have conversations, but the questions that I'm seeing all of my teacher message boards blow up with, and my Instagram and all of that. So Torie, this is to you. How does a global pandemic impact a teacher's contractual obligations, or does it? And if a teacher feels uncomfortable returning to work, will there be repercussions for that?
It definitely has huge contract, makes changes, especially, well, for instance, right now, Oklahoma City, we will start the first 9 weeks virtually, but that changes things right now. Duty schedule, sick days, there's so much in the contract that will impact, and we will have to go back to the table to look at that. But for instance, sick days, that's a big one. If a teacher isn't able to come to school, what do? Will they use all their sick days? So that's a huge concern. Luckily, we have the CARES Act, and so they can have the 10 extra days. And I do believe that Oklahoma City will be flexible with working with people, and it's a benefit that if it's someone in your family, we have extended FMLA, but that's going to be a struggle for so many, and that will change the contract.
Yeah, just to add more context to what you're saying, in case anybody watching doesn't know, I mean, teachers are given, I think it's pretty universal, 10 days, 10 sick days. And under normal circumstances, it's like you have a cold here and there like that. So your 10 should stretch. I'll be honest and say that since I've had a baby, I'm always using up my 10. Before I ever got pregnant, I had days left over. I had 20 days left over because I'm not one to stay home a whole lot. But babies catch everything, and so I used up all of my sick days the last 2 years. And then thinking about COVID, like the recommendation for if there's sickness is to stay home for 2 weeks. And so there's your 10 days right there. But what happens if there's another exposure later? What happens if the first exposure was mine and then the second one is my daughter's?
Exactly. And it's not fair for someone to use all their sick days that they possibly did save for a pregnancy or whatever it may be. But so that's the reality we're in right now and facing.
Mm-hmm.
And will there be an expectation, like if will there be an expectation that you are taking a sick day, or because you're already working remotely, that you can still monitor your email and you can still deliver that, send out some assignments, and you can still check your feedback to your students? Like, are teachers going to be hesitant to take those sick days, not knowing when they're really sick, if they do get COVID, and therefore continue to work through that under those kind of conditions, just feeling that pressure to not have a separation between work and school because you're doing everything from home?
Right.
That's an excellent question.
I can definitely go ahead, Torie.
No, I agree. Even I have a teacher that asked recently if do I have to take my sick leave now if I'm at home? And I would say no. If you're still doing everything that you can do from home, and the students aren't there, then I wouldn't want to. I would want to save that. But for some people, they may not feel the same way. And if they're sick, they want to take that day off. And that's their right too.
Bracken.
I don't know about, I'm sure it's true for teachers too, but since we went to the distance model and we're working from home, the difference between like 8 to 5 or whatever teachers' hours are, 9 to 5, whatever one's hours are, became so blurred. Like it would be a big deal after 5 o'clock to say like, oh, let's have a meeting, and you drive into work to have a meeting. But since everybody's just 5 steps away from Zoom, like there are meetings called at all hours because it's that easy, right? Like there's not that hurdle to get to a meeting. So hours have definitely been extended, like email checking, responding, Teams, Microsoft Teams chats, Slack chats, like all these things sort of start happening 7 a.m., 6 a.m., and don't quit until like 10:30, 11:30 at night. And there's not like a hard expectation to be able to do all of that. But there's definitely like an internal like driver for some of us. I'm not going to name any names or anything, but can't let that stuff go or sit there. And it's just become harder to like say like, now I'm done with work, now I'm at work, because there's no physical location to do or drive to or come back from.
And if you're home with your children and you're their teacher while they're home, and you're sharing devices, and you're trying to also make dinner and be a parent and do your own job and do your, forbid you actually do some of your own reading and exercise and all that kind of thing, you can't really stop and get online to have that meeting until 10:30 at night, or to check your emails until then, because of all of those conditions. And that, to expect that contractually of the teachers is really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's an interesting segue, because the grad class that I was taking, just like Uriah mentioned before, having university shut down in the middle of the semester, obviously I was in an in-person class that was intended to be an in-person class. So university professors and everybody, but I feel like it might have been different for university professors to go from everything, because they have to create everything so far in advance. Sometimes syllabi are turned in like a year or so in advance at times, and so to go from what you had planned to have to replan everything for the last quarter, and it's completely different when like Uriah said, when the students are paying for it. Like public ed, it's kind of like, we gave you this, like we're responsible, but also global pandemic hashtag. But with university, like we all came up off of some money for that, so there's this pressure. My professor's daughter is literally the same age as my daughter, and I know how hard it was for me to try, and it was nearly impossible to make those phone calls that I was referring to about like the technology and stuff, because she's always running around being loud, and I'm like, I can't, how does my professor even live? And that's why that Sarah just said happens, because it's like, okay, well, my baby's gonna wake up at 8, and so if I wake up at 5, then I can do all of this work before she wakes up, and then bedtime's at 8, and so then I can work from 8 to 11, which also means I'm not sleeping, but so it's wild. Torie, just, I don't know if there's more to this. If there's not, just let me know. What does the role of the union become in providing support for teachers during this unprecedented situation?
Well, I would say first, just listening, hearing what teachers need, but also, to go to Sarah's point, that is a huge issue and can be a contract issue if teachers are having to work at all hours, because that isn't normal. We have a set day, we have a set schedule. So that could be a huge concern. And I can see that being an issue. Back in the spring when we went to distance learning, it was more, it just happened overnight. So no one knew what they were doing. The expectations were very low, very, very low. So, but they can't be that way this time. So I know we are going to run into so many issues. And even though everyone's going to be as flexible as they can, we're going to have problems. So just listening to those and addressing those when they come up in an equitable way will be important.
Yeah. Super brave of you to be in the position that you're in the middle of these circumstances. And you just got, is it an election over the summer?
Yes. I'm newly elected. So in April, right? Okay. Right. Perfect timing. And then the year before it was P2G. The year before is the walkout, the teacher walkout. So just education in Oklahoma Oklahoma City specifically has had a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I told my students, did anybody notice the pattern? This is a little off topic. The pattern, though, from the walkout was 2 years ago. We've had an interruption every spring for the last 3 years. The walkout was 2 years ago. We had Pathway to Greatness, but then just in Oklahoma City, do you remember all the computers were shut down? We didn't have computers for like 10 days. no
Right.
internet access.
Yeah.
And then this year was pandemic. And so it's like, we don't have springtime at school in Oklahoma anymore. Like, it's wild.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see what I might come back to that one in a second. Those are boring. Okay. Bracken and a little bit Torie. What are the options for teachers? Actually, probably more Torie, a little bit Bracken. For teachers who are compromised or might fall ill. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the question I wanted. Skip that one. Uriah, talk to us a little bit about similarities and differences you feel. Tell us about, I want to hear how your classes were going in March when everything, like Torie said, shut down overnight, and what kind of the plans are for Oklahoma State. I know I have a little bit of perspective about UCO. What's the transition look like?
Well, coming off of spring break when OSU just shut down during spring break, it was madness. It was literally madness. Housing basically declared that all single side students, which is over 30,000 people, just to give a good number that lives in single side, had to move out. You can literally imagine the chaos that came with that. Parents calling in constantly, asking questions that we didn't have answers for. Issues arriving left and right. At that time, we really didn't have no guidance from CDC or anything like that. So it's kind of a wing it yourself type apparatus. Classes themselves, I mean, what could you do? I mean, you can't. There was always an ebb and flow, and luckily my department was very open about that ebb and flow, because they're like, well, we know your workload's not going to be as impressive as we expect it to be, especially for graduate students. But at the same time, we still do need you to have some degree of quality that comes with with the status that you're trying to take on. And that was kind of an ebb and flow. Several times, and I won't get into details, we've had several times where international students attempted suicide. And that goes back to the mental thing. They couldn't handle it. Some people, and I can say that everybody at OSU probably went through this to the point where that breaking point that you were like, I can't stay in this place no more. OSU didn't have an answer for that. And we had to hodgepodge together answers for that with different departments, and that comes with its various forms of red tape, and that causes more grief and more issues. Over the summer, at least for housing, which department I work for, we've had 24 different policy changes, and that's just a guesstimate. And we're still going to have policy changes until the doors open in a couple of weeks. We're still adding stuff. We're still taking away stuff. Luckily, OSU's medical side has done some really good things. We have a testing lab in-house, so students can get tested here for free. So that's fantastic. But that still causes a whole bunch of other issues in other spots. Stillwater has mandated masks as a whole for the city. OSU has followed suit. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good thing. But now we're looking at enforcement issues, because we're taking kids that come from their home areas and they're going to come to a place like this, because usually colleges, hey, I'm away from home, I don't have to follow no rules, they're my rules, and then that gets negated. Okay. So now we're dealing with enforcement issues and punishment issues, and that goes into a whole nother set of maddening things that different departments are arguing with right now. It's just kind of an unfun situation.
It is. That's I want to dig into that a little bit. That was actually a question on my list. But mask mandates, that's the whole thing in Tri-City. Bracken and I and the other members have been having these conversations constantly about, well, you want a mask mandate because it keeps everybody safe, but whenever you mandate anything, then you have to police that thing. And so, of course, it's like, okay, well, what if everybody who's enforcing carries around the mask and they're like, here's your mask, then you give that opportunity and you don't have to. But with students, I will never, I'm going to use the segue that I already had presented to Sarah, and I'm going to let her talk about restorative justice practices a little bit. But I teach high school, and I've taught 7th grade for 3 years, but I'm a high school teacher. I took a detour into 7th grade and I teach high school. kids, like you said, kids don't want to follow rules. So they're with me and they're like, I don't want to do this, but you're bigger than me and I don't want to get grounded and I do want to play football, so I'll do it. But then they go to university and they're like, I'm not doing anything. I'm grown now, right? So they don't, but like dress code has always been a huge thing. You're not supposed to wear your hoodie at school. You're supposed to have on a belt. You're supposed to have in closed-toed shoes. And like all of those things had a safety issue, you know, at some point when they were instituted, right? Your pants need to be up so that you can run from a fire if you need to. And like, you know, the strings on a hoodie could like strangle you if somebody snatched you back. Okay, so, but kids don't care about that. They're like, whatever, I want to wear my hoodie. And so what teachers do is they're on one side of the line or the other. They're like, okay, well, I'm just not going to say anything, because what do I really want to do is I really want to educate. I really want to teach you this content. So I'm just not going to say anything because I want to teach you this content. And then you have other teachers who are like, oh, nope, no belt, nope, go to the office, or let me write you a referral or whatever. And we know that both of those behaviors, like neither one of them are perfect, but we have this issue with how to enforce mandates. So now when that mandate is like so we don't all get COVID instead of in case a fire might happen, which it usually doesn't, like we have this whole other issue. Sarah, what would you like to say to that?
Well, first, I think we need to address the fact that, trauma is experienced in a multitude of ways. It's directly and it's indirectly, and the isolation that so many students are experiencing can trigger past trauma, and it generates new trauma as well. So we have our students coming with this heightened sense of fight or flight, especially in schools that have history of using behavior management systems, like, I don't know if I can say what they're called, but programs that you have in your school to monitor students' behaviors, and a system of giving them checks or referrals, or and so many teachers have relied on some of these school mechanisms for classroom management. They've come to say, if you're not in dress code, you get this demerit or this referral. And here we have our students that are coming right now living in trauma, and let's just address the fact that so are the teachers and the administrators, and we're all experiencing trauma in different ways. And for many of us, this has triggered different kinds of trauma. And I think Bracken mentioned this earlier. Some of us are in situations where we have family members that we're afraid of, and that there's an increase in domestic violence, whether our students are witnessing it or part of it or protecting siblings from it. Like, all of these things are happening in these spaces. And this, the numbers that we're seeing that are quantifying the cases of coronavirus or the death, like, are not even touching all of the things that resist measurement, all of the consequences and implications that can't be quantified. And so this is happening all over, and yet we're not really talking a lot about how we're going to help our students during this time of stress. And when we talk about the racial composition of schools, that's associated with more punitive practices and less reparative approaches. And if we're distancing for 9 weeks, how are we going to build the relationships that we need in order to repair some of that trauma? And maybe some of the students are even feeling violated by our schools to put them in these positions. And so, like, this, now students are even more opposed to school and angry with them, even if they're not really aware that that's what's happening. So here we are, like, students are either going to be subverting or withdrawing or apathy or lashing out. And if some of them are in the classrooms feeling this, that's one thing. And if they're away from the schools, that's a whole another thing. And so we really need to be thinking about, maybe in these extra couple weeks, now that the schools have delayed their start to August 31st, not just the technology, but some real conversations about how we're going to nurture relationships with our students and how we're going to repair the harm that's sort of been done for the last, several months. And, so that for me is where I would like some people to be stepping in. And we have a shortage of teachers. We also have a shortage of school social workers and psychologists, but I really would like to see them stepping up and helping advocate for that sort of work to happen before we start schools again.
It's a huge factor. Go ahead, Bracken.
I know too that like students of color are overrepresented in like referrals and that's sort of like part of the school like demerit system or whatever. So mask mandates, you know, if we're to take historical data and apply it to that, we would assume that students of color would be overrepresented in referrals for not wearing masks as well. So that brings a whole other like equity issue to the mask mandate as well in schools. Not to mention just walking around Oklahoma or cities that have it in general, right? Mm-hmm. I think that sort of, again, teachers are asked to do a lot, and we need to sort of train teachers and give them the tools they need to sort of identify and proactively work towards like reversing this trend of over-identifying students of color. I also wanted to add the students in City Lab, we were talking to them about the mask mandate and how's that going to work in school. And they had sort of a carrot and stick approach. Like the carrot was if the school or you personally go through the week without any like mask slip ups, you get a free dress day or something positive that you could get towards working. And if you slip up, you get given a free mask once, and then just a sort of a tiered level of getting in trouble for not wearing a mask. But I liked the carrot idea. Like if you do this, like it shows like we want students to learn empathy skills. We want students to take care of each other in their community. So why not reward them for adhering to these things, right? Like that was a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't tell, like I love my City Lab kids.
Yeah. Well, I think like with the restorative justice model, having like responsive talking circles, like that's a really clear strategy that we can teach students right away to organize responsive talking circles, even if it's a call in on landlines, into a Zoom session. If students don't have internet, they can call in on the landline and you can have those conversations along the lines of, what if someone isn't wearing a mask because they have asthma or they have anxiety and they're not wearing it, and so we don't want to look at them and be angry with them or talk down to them or be punitive with those sort of choices too. But I think the more talking circles that we can have with our students and teachers, the better we can move toward like building relationships and understanding instead of yes or no, right or wrong, you're in trouble, you're not in trouble, like creating spaces of those dialogues, I think. And it sounds like you're doing that, Bracken, at the city.
Yeah.
It's also,
go ahead.
It also brings up sort of a HIPAA FERPA thing too, right? Like if a student is allowed to wear a mask, they're automatically identified as medically, like they have a medical issue. Yeah. So there's a privacy like aspect to the mask mandate as well that we need to think about. We need before something happens, we need to have a plan in place or a policy or a set of actions in place to sort of make sure we are being like respectful and we are being we're handling it as best we can, like rather than like Uriah's been saying and we've all been saying, like instead of hodgepodging together an emergency, like all of a sudden our hair's on fire, like we can see this coming, like let's put some water in our hair and not let it get on fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Preventative measures and trainings, as we were talking about before we got on here. Oklahoma City teachers are starting back on the 27th. Teachers are going to we have a potential unique opportunity, whether you're in Oklahoma City or not, with things being mostly virtual, to have more purposeful time for the adults to talk about, or I should say the authorities, because authorities, I don't like that word either, but the people who are in charge of the things, to talk about the right way to do things, since we don't have we have both more of a time crunch and less of a time crunch, because we don't have to go anywhere to clock in, but we do have so many things that we have to do. So I think that's a thing. I think that's a thing that we should definitely be looking toward. Torie, I'm curious if you, especially because your daughter, you said she was gonna start kindergarten. Okay. Mm-hmm. I guess she still is, just not in the way that she was. So I have a friend who also has like under 8-year-olds, like four kids under 8. And she was saying that she stopped doing the online thing and started doing homeschool because it's not that she couldn't monitor the kids all in front of the computer. She just didn't think that was like the most beneficial thing to them. So as we were just talking about relationships and trauma and all of that mask mandating, like what are your thoughts, not only just for your little one, but for all of the kids, like how much different school is now, even when we do get back in person, how much different it is than it used to be, and the effect that has on them?
It's going to have a huge effect. She was in pre-K last year, so I joked around that she didn't really know any different, but that was a crazy first year of school. Yeah. So when she goes in this year, it will be different. The first 9 weeks will be different. When she goes back to school, learning how to use a mask. But I think that's another important thing, just knowing the importance of it and the reason why they're doing it, not just being forced to do it, because then it's going to become more of a discipline, or just, I don't want to do it because you're telling me to. So I think just teaching that will be beneficial also. But for kids, and I would never be I taught kindergarten, but I could never teach homeschool. But now I think that everyone just has to make the best decision for their own family. If you are in the situation where you are able to homeschool your children, or you know someone that can, then do that option. Great for you. If you need to go to an online school, good for you. If you are just going to, you just have to do the best you can. That's the main thing. But everyone's making tough decisions right now. So being respectful of, we need to be respectful of other people's decisions when they make those choices too. Because I haven't always been in the past, but I have to now.
Absolutely. I think it's natural, especially I think educators, people who work around schools, tends to be kind of an opinionated lot. And so we're like, well, this is the reason in school is better. And this is the, and now everything's just turned on its ear. Like almost nothing is better or worse at this point. Everybody is just kind of trying to do the best that we can.
I would also mention an extra layer to this. This may not affect younger children, but statistics and, just dealing with people in general, especially since this pandemic has been active, politicalization is younger now.
Yeah.
I have ran into young, my 11-year-old cousin tries to come at me, with, well, this, that, because misinformation is very strong and prevalent in our society right now since we're digital. This is not something this country's actually used to. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have particular targets. It targets anybody who believes it. So you're dealing with digital misinformation campaigns from it doesn't matter where. And on top, you have parents that will force feed their children into certain concepts and idealisms that previously, before this happened, you generally had a neutral ground when they went into school. It's like, hey, this is what our idealisms is, but in school, the school had enough weight to basically say, hey, leave that at the door. You're here just to learn. Now it's literally starting to stream into every portion of life, period. So education, basic conversations, like you stated before, Torie, just having basic respect. I'm happy you have it, but is the person that you're talking to going to give you that same thing? That's a whole nother question that we have to be ready for as teachers and students alike. That's what we're trying to prepare for here at OSU. Is I know there's going to be students that's going to come here and act sideways about the mandates. How do we approach that? Because the school is going to go by science. It's not going to go by personal opinions or anything of that nature. We have a full department here of health that's like, this is what's going to happen. But then you're going to have people that's going to try to abuse various ADAs, HEPAs, and this and that to try to benefit themselves when they don't have those issues. So it's kind of like a case 22. We want to respect the people that actually has the problems, but then we have to disenfranchise people that are making up excuses for them. that just try to be different or cool, or just like you said, just against the wave.
Yeah. I think that's the misinformation and the information in general and going digital. I was telling my boyfriend earlier that especially now that I'm back with juniors and seniors, guys, can you tell I'm excited? But everything is basically going to be about like subtext and like bias in what you're reading and logical fallacies and circular reasoning. Like that's where I'm doing my jumping off point, because I mean, if you're online, that's what we're seeing all day, every day. These people don't like this because this. These people don't like this because this. The CDC says this. I saw the meme that was like, the only thing that trumps science is new science, not, other whatever. So there's a lot. And I think that in the education space, that's a thing that we really have to be ready to be on our P's and Q's about. Where are you getting your information from? Why are they saying what they're saying? Do you believe it? And even if you don't believe it, that's not necessarily the point. Is it backed up by fact? And then what do we owe each other as a community? Because I think this might be one of the first times, definitely in my lifetime, if not kind of ever, where like everybody depends on everybody. We can't be as individualistic as we were before, and I can be pretty individualistic. So it's interesting to be doing this shift. Okay, I'm excited for this next portion of the conversation. Are we, Sarah, this is to you, but it's to everybody. There's space for everybody to talk about this, and I'm sure it'll take up the brunt of some time because there's a lot here. Are we in the education field prepared to answer big questions like, what does school even mean right now? What can we do to reframe the relevance of our work? That was already under attack before this. Why did I have to learn algebra? I should have been learning finance. Why did I have to learn blah, blah, blah when I should have been doing this? Now that we're under COVID-19, what does any of it mean? And what is ethical in terms of grades, in terms of metrics, in terms of assignments, when everyone in the entire world is experiencing a trauma and we don't know when that's going to end?
Yeah, I think what was fascinating about this, and I was on a webinar recently with Bettina Love, was on the webinar, along with Goldie Mohammed, and they were saying it's amazing what happened with COVID-19 and how quickly the last week there was no money for computers and hotspots, and last week we were so concerned about testing and grades, and all of a sudden that doesn't matter anymore, and all of a sudden there's money for computers, and all of a sudden there's money for, it just somehow that all happened, and somehow we didn't actually need that state test, right? And somehow we didn't actually have to give grades, pass or fail was fine, and all of a sudden that's okay. And so it does make you think, why were those pressures, systemic, mechanisms in place? What was their function? Who did they serve? And I know that there's books and classes and long history for all of these that we can't really tackle here. But for starters, how about just a moratorium on the test, on the state test? Let's just a moratorium for a little bit so we can figure out how important that is. If there's a better localized sort of test that we can offer. I know that some of that data is really important for minoritized populations because it's an indication of resources aren't going where they need to and we need to intervene. So I think that it's not that simple as just saying we don't need any way of accounting for what people are learning and not learning. But there has to be a better, more ethical way. And then when it comes to grades, when you think about what are the students really learning, what's important to know and be able to do and to be able to experience, and is the grade an indication of that they're knowing, learning, experiencing, interrogating? Is that the evidence that the grade, or is it evidence of compliance? Is it evidence of doing what you're told? Is it evidence of towing the line? And when we have to really think about what the grade actually means and indicates, we have to rethink our whole way of doing school. And that's scary for a lot of people, I know. But if you take a step back, I think our subversive students are sometimes like the best students if we talk about critical thinking and we talk about innovative thinking and we talk about problem solving. The student who bubbled in the test and didn't pay attention, they knew that no one's going to read this. They know this. There's no value. This doesn't speak to who I am. I'm not a number. And the student who isn't going to do the assignment, they know they're not doing the assignment because it doesn't speak to them. It doesn't engage with what they're doing. They have many other wonderful things that they're doing outside of school that engage their thinking, give them a voice, a place in the world. Look at their Instagram feed. It's amazing. And those aren't things that we're accounting for in school because it's not what school has traditionally done. So I think this is a wonderful time to rethink all of those questions. I don't think we can do everything in the next couple of weeks before we get back into school, but I think it's really important to start interrogating it and getting the voices who are really reimagining that and want to talk about it, like lift up their voices and let's listen to what they have to say.
Absolutely. When you were talking about what the tests measure and why that matters, right? So there's probably more sides than what the two that I'm about to name, but the two that I think of are what you mentioned, which is, well, we need to reallocate some resources here. Like these reading scores are low, so we need to give them a reading specialist in their school, et cetera, et cetera. But then on the flip side, a lot of people attribute that to the school to prison pipeline, like, oh, this many third graders failed the test, so we need to build a new prison pretty close to here because all of these kids are about to get arrested. And so even as an educator, and especially as a language arts educator, so much falls on like reading. And Torie, I was just thinking about you a minute ago, kindergarten, like the kids who are supposed to be learning to read and learning to write like right now. So for older kids, it's easy to say like, oh, throw out school for right now. That's not the most important thing. We're going to focus on mental health and we're going to focus on this and that. And like Torie and I and some other people, we might feel equipped, like, well, I'll just teach them to read at home. But, everybody doesn't necessarily feel equipped for that. Sarah, can you give some examples or just some of your thoughts? I know you've written on the topic about what we can be doing to satisfy a little bit of both sides.
Well, I think there's something to be said for looking at, I know that Oklahoma is rewriting their standards, their English language arts standards, and hopefully that will bring some changes. But I think if we look at some of the standards and have that sort of inform the things that we're asking our students to do, and instead of arbitrarily saying like you have to do this project and it's 100 points and you get an A, B, or C or something like that, it's just to really engage with the students and say, we want to see that you're able to write an argumentative essay, a multimodal argumentative essay, which means it could be a blog post, it could be a video, it could be a spoken word piece. I want you to show me, like, let's design a project around something you care about and that you're passionate about, that we can, a genuine rhetorical purpose that you're passionate about in the world, and let me help you use what I know about argument to do that and to produce that. And then when we're done, can you point to how you made these rhetorical moves in your piece? Yeah, I did this and I did this and I did this. Well, there you go. There's evidence of learning. There's evidence of real authentic learning. And I think we can bring our students, again, this goes back to having relationships as the students, as our learning partners, as our thought partners in the classroom, who have a ton more expertise in the world that we don't all have. And inviting them into it. And I think you can use the standards, you can use them, draw on those things that are there, and that's a common standard, but then not measure them with the numbers and the letters, but do it in a way of like portfolio type work and asking the students to create things. I think we're in a place to reimagine what school looks like. And still, if at the end of that, the student doesn't have any evidence of those things, then we have to take a step back and figure out, where was it the teaching or was it the learning that broke down, and how to repair that?
Yeah, so it sounds like some inquiry-based learning, some project-based learning, maybe a little bit of standards-based, not grading but assessing, like this is where that standard played out. Sounds like some of those things. And that actually sounds like what Bracken was describing, that city, what's the name of it? I can't see your shirt. But that's
City Lab.
City Lab. Yeah, I was gonna say gear. I feel like that's an actual t-shirt brand. City Lab is doing is like letting those kids, this is the world that we want to live in, so let's do that. Now, does City Lab, does it like replace school, or how is it an after school thing?
So City Lab, well, who knows now? But it was to take place over spring break and summer vacation. So like a week during spring break and then 2 weeks over summer vacation. So who knows, like, because the school schedule is just out the window, right? Like everything's been revamped and revised. Like, but so it doesn't take the place of school, but it very much like, I think it has a lot for schools to take from it. Like, and programs like Tulsa Term that my good friends Jane and Ed are in as well. Experiential learning, right? Like we're still teaching school the way we were teaching school when Henry Ford sort of redesigned it for factory workers.
Yeah.
We're not in the same economy anymore. We're not in the same like world anymore. Like we're a global society. We're a post-technological society, I guess, at this point. The things we need to teach students, like, well, so first of all, we know that like, what is it, like 80% of the jobs students will have when they graduate don't exist yet. So we're teaching them how to do things that we think are important versus like giving them a toolkit. Like I think the things we should be really focusing on are giving students the ability to identify problems, to do creative problem solving, to be good presenters, because we all know that the best idea doesn't win, the best presentation wins. So leadership skills, collaborative skills, stuff like that, like a toolkit with which they can be dropped into any sort of scenario the future holds and figure out how to do it. And then, of course, that comes with content delivery as well. Like students do need to know certain things. Like there are things we do need content delivery for students to have. Like students can identify that themselves when they're working on a project, right? Like in an experiential learning place, they can say like, well, we run into a problem and we need to figure this out. We need some content delivery here. But you're allowing them to get to the place where like, they're starting off and like looking at the world or the situation and they don't know what they don't know. So how do they know what to ask for? But they're going through this process, they start to realize like, oh, I don't know this chunk here. I need to know that. So they're sort of confronting they're beginning to identify the areas where they need to learn, and they can ask for those things as they move through it. But yeah, so I guess that's what City Lab does, is it's experiential, and it puts kids in the driver's seat, and it asks them to identify problems, do some creative problem solving, do some leadership skills, communication skills, collaboration, all that. But so I think like Jenna or like Sarah was saying, and you, Nasha, as well, like there's ways to work the standards in there, or to like look at what they're doing and say, well, this shows like rigor, like this is a rigorous process and they've learned, and this is the demonstration of that. And I do feel like this has given us a great opportunity to sort of like rethink and redo the way we do school, the way we deliver school. We're in the 21st century now. Like we don't need to be teaching the same way we have been for, like it was great in the 20s, right? It was great in the 1910s when we were turning out factory workers. That's not what we're doing anymore. We should really reevaluate the way we deliver school. This is a great opportunity for that.
So this is my biggest concern, my huge worry. All those things that you said, Bracken, all of that work, all that experiential, collaborating, problem solving. But one of the options that I read online is, and this is actually one of the things that happened right when we went into social remote learning, is that the teachers would make a packet of materials and send them home. Mail them, because the students didn't have access to technology or didn't have the Wi-Fi, and so then they receive a packet and they fill out the packet and then they send it back, right? There has to be, if that's the only option, there has to be a way of reimagining that delivery method, so that further inequities are not perpetrated upon these. We're not doing further harm on the vulnerable populations that are, that are already further distance and don't have access to social things. And so I don't think like that is one of the pathways that of delivery of schooling that's going to be happening. And that is my greatest concern, is just packet education.
No, absolutely. Go ahead, Uriah.
I think with dealing with recreation of the school curriculum or just schooling as a whole, we actually have to look at core issues, the meritocracy, the merit-based system, and you have to look at redlining, because that's a big deal. Schools are paid through taxes. Taxes are paid through districts. When I was in school, I graduated with 32,000 kids. That's not even a joke. But I mean, well, correction, 3,200. There was 50,000 kids there. I came from Broken Arrow.
Oh.
But we knew we were taken care of because there was that many parents that was well off. We knew that the funds would come. They had programs that made money for the school. A robust band program. The football program was self-sustaining. This is not possible in certain areas and districts. Before I was in Broken Arrow, I went to James Madison in North Tulsa. There was a drastic, stark difference between these two schools, and both of their purposes is to educate. And when I talk about merit-based systems, I'm talking about the college system, because no matter how you try to basically recreate the educational, primary and secondary, they still have to fit in the boxes that the colleges want, so they have a chance to do what they want to do. And I'll tell you now, colleges are very stubborn about making changes on that end. Harvard is not going to change their standards, just like OSU, who is more likely to change standards because, we want to be more open. But those prestigious elite schools that have an elite purpose, they're going to be a problem in the forefront of making all these changes. And then that's going to cause more ostracization. That's going to cause more problematic scenarios where a student may be more artistically based in their understanding or in their learning, but then they want to go to this college because it has something they're passionate about. But that school's like, well, we're not going to cater to you. Welcome to college. You cater to us. And that's a problem. Education is a fluid motion, and we are still, like stated before by Bracken, we're still in this 1920s concept. We don't need nationalization of education anymore. We need education that is actually beneficial to the country itself. One of the most problematic things that America does as a whole is we do not invest in education properly. We don't create the systems and the industries that would support the evolution of technologies. Silicon Valley is a self-sufficient system because the school systems around it help sustain that function. But as a whole, like I can use Oklahoma, for example, what do we have going for us except call centers? I mean, in seriousness, what technological advancement we talk about, we're in postmodern tech, but Oklahoma's not. We're still regarded as a farming state, even though we do have niches in certain places where we do actually benefit. It's farming or petroleum, and the government that we have don't want to move from those. So you're already limiting the options for people to even stay in here, even if they get educated here. That brain drain, which leads to teacher crises. People don't want to work in a state where there's nothing to benefit from. People don't want to be in a state where they know they're going to be basically treated subpar, depending on what district they are. I mean, Broken Arrow, Union, Jinx, Tulsa is very different standards that they can achieve. But then we look at the government system who provides that money. They're like, well, it is what it is and we can't change it. We have this very lackadaisical, almost in a block thinking pattern when it comes to education. But we see on the world scale, America is constantly falling behind on all metrics because the people don't want to evolve their standard of thinking.
I think what it comes down to is that nobody can agree on evolving it across the board. You've got pockets of people everywhere. You got pockets of people in Oklahoma City, or not Oklahoma City, the state of Oklahoma. You've got pockets of people probably in every state who agree that everything needs to move forward. But like you were talking about the power structure, just because a group of people wants things to move forward doesn't mean that everything will move forward as a whole. And so the centralized funding and all of those things play a factor. I'm going to circle back to Sarah in a minute, but Torie, I've been thinking about, and I'm thankful that I have a little bit of time. My daughter will be 3 in October, but I've been thinking about what do I want school to look like for her, right? So like, I went to private school and then I went to public school. I was always I always liked school. I was always good at school. School was always fun for me, but that's partially because I was an overachiever and I wanted all the adults to tell me how good of a job that I was doing. I was, always searching for those A's. When I hear, so I'm a creative, and now that I have the older kids, I'm super excited to just project base everything. This is blah blah blah. Show me what you can do. Let's have a poetry slam. I'm into that. But then I turn around and I'm like, but does that work for a 4-year-old? Does that work for a 5-year-old? Does that work for anybody under middle school? Because even when I was teaching 7th, they're 12, they're 13, and they are creative and they are smart and they do have access to information that I didn't have access to when I was 12 and 13. But I find myself struggling with the line of like, providing structure until a certain age before you allow them to like branch out and be creative and do things on their own. I know for me, I felt like I started doing a little bit of that in high school, but university is where I was really able to like, okay, I'm gonna go do my own thing now. As a parent to a kindergartner, how do you feel about, this is totally a like personal question, but like, how do you feel about creative free-for-all hands-on experiential learning versus like, we got to do the reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Right. And I'm all with you. And most people in early childhood would agree that children learn through play. They learn through experiences and being able to be creative. So I think that, one, yes, they do need to learn how to read, and going into kindergarten, that's the time that happens. But we also need to let them play, let them be creative, let them do what they want to do. And if they don't know yet, they're going to figure it out. And that goes back to even for older kids. And Becky, you talked about this earlier. We have to teach students in different ways because everyone learns in different ways. We all learn differently. And for instance, not everyone would want to go to Harvard. Some would, some don't, but we have to be able to give our students those opportunities, whether they want that or what if they don't. So they have to be able to learn on their own, in their own way.
Yeah.
I wanted to add that, like, when I worked at a private school in Tulsa, the kids that came there from Montessori schools did really well. And they'd been at Montessori from like, day one of education. So the transition, they did well, like almost immediately. Now I say that acknowledging that people who can afford to send their kids to Montessori and then to the school I worked at, which was, I think, the most expensive school in the state, that says so there's something there besides like just saying Montessori is good and this, transition to there, like a parent's ability to afford that. Like it shows up, like parents' wealth shows up in SAT scores and ACT scores, right? Like that also shows up, I'm sure, in student success in Montessori and then the private school I worked at. So I say that with that caveat, still kids that came from Montessori did well at the school I was at.
They need that. They do. That time to just be creative and learn who they are.
Yeah. I think that education really struggles on all of the levels. I think we really struggle because of the statement, Torie, you made a minute ago. Everybody doesn't want the same things. but we want everyone to be prepared for whatever it is that they want. And so that meeting of like, okay, well, because this is probably going to be this phrase is probably going out now, but like college and career ready, right? So we want you to be able to move into whichever thing you want to do. If you want to be a nail tech, if you want to be a cosmetologist, if you want to drive a truck, if you want to go to the military, if you want to go to Harvard, we want them to be able to do all of those things, but they are all coming at that from a different perspective. There was a teacher that I taught with last year who said that he was kind of tracked, and I know we went away from tracking, but like he was tracked a little bit into the like career path, and he did some like vo-tech type things, and he didn't go to university right off, but then at 20, he went back to university and then immediately followed that up with a master's, and he's an English teacher now. And so we don't know what, as little kids, they're into what they're into, and they're well, this is an artsy kid, and this is a kid who's going to do the Harvard track. They present what they present, but it's a long life, and they can change their minds, and I think that's where the struggle comes in, is how in the world do we prepare everyone, because everyone is at those different levels, thinking about introduction level and kindergarten level. I briefly pretended like I was going to get a master's in reading development, and in one of my classes this never even occurred to me, because I have a family of teachers and pastors, and my grandma kept me for a while, and she taught me to read and write. I was reading and writing at 3. I'm not like tooting a horn. I'm showing the differences in people, right? So when I was in this class, they were like, we get 5 and 6-year-olds starting kindergarten who don't know how to hold a pencil. And I was like, I'm sorry, what happened? Like, because my 2-year-old holds a pencil right now, and she'll tell you how to spell her name, and so that, and just looking at just different lifestyles, that's not a value judgment, and it's not an intelligence judgment. It's literally just a like what you get around to at your house, what your daycare situation looks like, what it doesn't look like, and so even just at that kindergarten level, you've got kids in a classroom who don't know how to hold a pencil, and kids in a classroom who already know all their ABCs and how to read, Sally and Jane went to the store. How do we then prepare them for college, career, and everything, Sarah, if you have anything else you want to say about that and about the school track, or anybody else on that topic.
I'm exhaling because there's so much. There's just so much. There's just so much to reimagine with that, and I think I'll just like kind of reflect on something that keeps kind of resonating with me. So Chad Everett, who's a principal, has a great blog, but he also wrote this poem last year, and in the poem he wrote, "They gave me a contract, not a cape." And I think we talk about teachers as heroes, and I think we have to sort of reimagine that word and how we use that word and how we talk about it. And the teachers, again, we have a contract to do our work. We did not get a cape. We are not superheroes. And we just have to value the teachers for what their work is, and the kind of work that we're all trying to do as individuals. Collectively, there's people doing great activist work and coming together and trying to make changes at the policy level. But I think the real talk here, is that all of us are individuals trying to get through our day the best that we can. And for me, at this time, it is about using whatever technology or distant learning or policy to get to know the students. And if that means a telephone call and a landline, or a Zoom session, or a letter exchange back and forth, we have to just do what we're capable of doing, just right now. And when it comes to grades, attendance, wearing a mask, being on time, we need a lot more grace with this and not holding on to, it's really concrete to say you wore a mask, didn't wear a mask, you get a point or don't get a point. I think it's easy to look for those places it's right or it's wrong. But right now, I think we need to stay in that nuanced space and give each other some grace.
Yeah, I agree. Uriah, back to a little more nitty gritty related to COVID. Do you feel like the universities have maybe caught up? Are they ready for the fall? Are they more ready for the fall than secondary? I mean, Oklahoma City Public and I probably everybody is pushing start dates back to August 31st. But the last time I checked my email, like UCO's not pushing back. They're widening their virtual options, but we're not starting later. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, OSU will be starting on the 17th of August. So we're not being pushed back or anything like that. Compared to primary and secondary, yes, I do believe the universities are a little bit better prepared, but they have more freedom to be prepared.
Yeah.
They're not bound by, since they're federal, since, colleges are considered federal, they're not bound by state really mandates and things like that could cause red tape to pop up here or there a bit.
Yeah.
But we've been shot.
Uh-oh. Sorry, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if anybody else can
That's
hear.
me. That's me. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
When ICE made their arbitrary decision to suspend visas for students, that literally put the whole university in panic mode because we didn't know what was happening.
Right.
We had no data. We were literally like everybody that heard it. What's going on? And that caused we have probably about, say, 2,000 international students, and that's just a strong guesstimate, including kids and families. Imagine those calls that came in.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to stay? I can't afford to get back home. I can't go home because, there's asylum programs attached to universities also.
Yeah.
What do you do about those situations?
Right.
Obviously we've already accepted, and I think every college in the country has accepted, we're not getting any international students this year.
Yeah.
And international students pay, I would say, probably 2.5 times more than a regular student that lives in state. So that's big money for the university. And they bring a whole plethora of culture and various educations and things like that. It's shot.
Yeah.
And it causes some, obviously there's some other issues that's tied into. We're kind of in the perfect storm of everything bubbling up to the surface and having to contend with all those issues. We have many professors that live on campus that have kids. They're asking questions of how they're going to deal with their children because Stillwater Schools still has to deal with state mandates. How does that bleed over? Do they have to do extra stuff? Do we have to do A, B, and C now? There's still a multitude of questions that won't be answered by August 17th. And we've accepted that.
Yeah.
We've accepted there'll be a number of COVID cases that will pop up in this school. We've at least tried to make, again, a hodgepodge. It's a good option. It's not perfect, but it's better than having nothing.
Right.
And again, just for the professors that I do get to talk to, they're kind of in the gray. Like they don't know exactly how they can set up a syllabus now. Like you stated, some syllabus are set up a year before because they have brackets they need to fill in for certain classes. It's kind of tossed up in the air. My courses have been changed 3 or 4 times because things have been tossed up in the air. It's a very stressful time for university students. Then when you think on the concept, people are paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to go to school a year, and to have this type of, I wouldn't say unpreparedness because I want to give benefit to the doubt, but to have this continued negligence is the appropriate word, and I hate to even use that word, but appropriate negligence from administration is kind of painful And it really is, because it isn't like, at least in your situation, there's unions and things like that. In certain situations here on campus, there's not. There's tenure. Tenure dictates some things, not, hey, we need to come together. Some professors are just being obstinate because they want to be obstinate. And you really hate to call out basically your own university about that, but I'm a person that believes you take the good with the bad. And we have to accept that when there's a problem, we need to address it appropriately. And we need to start becoming preventative and not reactive to every situation. That's schooling, that's government, that's everything in America. We are reactive to everything because we've been trained to be reactive to everything, not proactive. And as we're starting to become proactive, because we have to due to COVID, you're starting to see little bits of change, and it's in a good. But when August 17th happens, we're expecting probably about 200 students to be here with COVID, and it may be higher. So where we're trying to give, where you were speaking earlier about giving grace for like masks and things like that, we can't do that, because we do have to think at a certain point, all those people have to go back home, and we're dealing with all 50 states. We're dealing with international students. We don't want OSU to have the brand that says we sent COVID back to Indonesia, or we sent it back to India, or it got traced back, from Ireland or something like that. That schools, at least universities, are a business at the end of the day. They're an educational business, so they can't handle that type of heat. So we can't give that type of grace. That's why they're so adamant about the punishment side of things right now. It's complicated, it's complex, it's muddy, it's messy, but it's the system that was developed years ago, decades ago, that we've just never wanted to touch again because it was profitable. Maybe we need to start having a question about what's economically and ethically right on a profit stage, because profit dictates all the decisions that's happening at this university right now. Housing has lost 100% of their budget.
Oh, wow.
Other departments have lost 100% of their budget and has taken severe cuts.
Yeah.
Wow.
How do you expect, teachers, trust me, I get it. How do you expect to function when you have less money or no money and you still want us to have the same standards?
Right. It's really difficult. I like the statement you made a minute ago about, whether we want to think of education as a business or not, but what has been interesting is seeing how businesses are responding to the pandemic, right? So, from small businesses, and some people have completely flipped up the way they were going to do business, and they've they're the businesses who adjusted and went all like curbside, and then they opened, we reopened the economy, and then they were like, "Ooh, just kidding, pull it back, right?" And so I think that I hadn't thought about that. So you said it's an educational business. Like perhaps universities can take some cues from the private sector of like, okay, here's where the line between being in the people business and being in the money business like cross. So it's 3:38, and like if we were in our in-person format, this would have been the time when we started taking like audience questions. I am gonna let any of you say or bring up whatever you feel like you want to bring up about COVID. So a week ago when I sent you guys these questions, there's a lot of like nitty gritty stuff about like masks, about social distancing in the hallway, about recess, about lunchrooms. And now I don't know if I didn't keep up necessarily with all the news, but I don't know if anybody in secondary is going back in person that we know of right now, secondary and elementary. Some people are still on the fence, but the way I've seen it play out in the past is usually Oklahoma City and Tulsa do a thing and then everybody else does that same thing. And so I don't know how much of that we need to deal with, although I'm completely open to us talking about what some of that might look like when, if we ever do get students back in front of our faces. That's a topic we can talk about. So I'm going to give you 3 things that are just up for grabs for the last 20 minutes. Okay. So the nitty gritty of whenever students come back to us, that's an option. This is, I'll do this. Education funding, right? So the U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, threatened to pull funding for anybody who didn't come back to school as normal. And I don't know if anything has happened since the NAACP decided to sue her for that. I don't know if she has recanted, or so there's another topic. And then this, back on the restorative justice thing, I don't know if you've seen the news about this student who I guess was on some kind of probation. And so she's doing virtual school because that's what everybody was doing. She didn't do her homework and she's been in jail for a while. Somebody pick a topic. Tell me some thoughts.
Just wanted to sort of, there's been several points in the discussion at which it just screams to me how much easier or how much less painful this would be if we had strong leadership in the State House. And I don't think that's too controversial. That's just you can look at the things that have been led by the state and it's very little and it's been way late. So I think it's just a statement of fact. But so much of this would have been so much easier if we had strong leadership, some guidance at the state level. We were fortunate for a little while in Tulsa with our mayor doing the right thing. He hasn't sort of been on that same page lately. And in TPS, our school district has great leadership, and we've been doing some pretty, I think, brave things and going forward with our plans based on science instead of fear or whatever. I think we're in some pretty good spots. But so much of these different conversations we've had just scream to me how much this could have been so much easier with some leadership from the State House.
Yeah, I just thinking about the nitty gritty. I heard somebody say well, if we shut everything down, then we'll slow the virus, or it doesn't magically disappear. I'm not a scientist, I don't know, but it's not going to disappear, I don't think. But they're if we stay closed longer, then we'll be able to open up schools sooner. And I don't know the science behind that, but that was just a thing that I thought of in terms of leadership. The leadership was saying close down, and then they were reopen phase 1, reopen phase 5, so anybody else, go for it.
I will say with the state leadership, I was very disappointed on Thursday when the state school board did not pass the mandates to make all districts follow suit. And we are fortunate in Oklahoma City public schools that we've had the best administration and leadership than we've had in a very long time. And they made that quick decision to go to virtual before anyone else had. But we really needed the state to make that decision for everyone, because not all districts can be trusted to make that decision, especially when this has become such a political pandemic. When it's not, it should go off science, but I don't trust all districts to make that decision and all leaders to make that decision.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, the check between the people at the state level and the people at the district level. As educators, we know district level people hold on to our power very, very tightly. Well, in our district, we do this, but like you said, it's a pandemic around the world, not just in your district. Anybody else on the nitty-gritty of COVID, or on education funding, or on jailing kids for not doing their homework, or any of it?
Just want to re-point out, we got to do something about districts. I think that's a bygone issue now. They do more damage than they help us now. When a person is less than 10 miles away from each other, have 2 very different educations, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
I don't care about racial, political, aspects, you know, because we are repeatedly propagated that we're the greatest country on earth. We you know, we get these smits, we get these lies. I'll be direct. I've seen much better states, much better services, and everything bleeds into everything. Like food security bleeds into healthcare, which bleeds into, because somebody that's not properly fed, they're going to have problems in school. You know, somebody that's not properly represented, they're going to have problems in other aspects of their life. In Oklahoma, we have the, you know, suck it up, buttercup, put your big boy shoes on type mentality. And that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. But we just stick to those guns because, again, like you stated earlier, leadership dictates everything. You can only do so much in your area before somebody above you says, I don't care, you're going to do it as I say. Mm-hmm. The voice of listening doesn't exist in a lot of these situations. Unfortunately, and like you stated, that vote, I was super disappointed. I was like, this should have been the easiest vote ever. It doesn't hurt nobody, but political stuff got right on top of it.
Yeah, it's really difficult. The district thing is super difficult because having worked for Oklahoma City, the biggest district, and then having worked for an independent district as well, I think that every district, to a varying degree, and not even just districts, right? Private schools, charter schools, everybody who's not part of the big system has this idea that we are going to do something better for our kids than what the mass can do. And that's not that I'm not saying that those people are wrong in thinking that, or even in wanting to do that. What I always think about is, whatever the thing is that you want to do for your students that's going to be better than what's happening in mass, how do we make that thing happen in mass? It's not that I want you to not do that thing in your district. I want to know how we can all do that thing, not how you just can do it at your school or in your district.
Mm-hmm. So on the school funding tip, Tulsa just had this delusion where we thought we were going to get Tesla here, which I don't know how or who thought we were actually going to pull that off. That was ridiculous, but people actually thought we were going to do that. But like, that points to a big problem Oklahoma has across the board. Businesses don't move to places based on tax cuts. They move to places based on educated populations. They want to move to a place where they can hire locally and not have to spend money training people how to do the work they're supposed to do. Businesses also won't move to a place where where their employees are forced to send their children to subpar schools. It's hard to get a family to move to a place where they know the schools aren't going to educate their kids. So by having our education system criminally underfunded, it keeps us from getting businesses here that would increase the tax base or whatever and help schools. So it's sort of a vicious cycle, right? Like, our schools are criminally underfunded. Teachers are doing the best they can with, I mean, the phrase has been, what is it? Doing less with more, or doing more with less. Like that's true to a point, right? Like, after a certain point, you need money. Like, you have to buy like computers or desks or sports ball equipment, whatever. So yeah, the criminally underfunded schools leads to fewer businesses being interested in Oklahoma, which perpetuates the criminally underfunded schools.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, you look like you're thinking of saying something.
I am. I don't, I'm just kind of speechless. I just think it's such a complex systemic problem that's, perpetuating itself. And I just, sort of keep going back to, where the school districts are going to give families choices. And some families will feel like they don't have a choice. They have to do one thing or the other because of their circumstances. And I'm worried about the families who will have to choose one way that's not best for their children and their education, but best for what their capacity, what they're able to do, and that's going to further perpetuate those inequities. So I don't think every choice, if you're going to tell your family, like, you can come part-time, you can do this online program and never see a teacher, you can get packets delivered to your home. I don't think those three options are equitable.
No.
But people are going to have to choose based on what they can do for their family. And so for that reason, I think what you were saying, Aja, like, I think there needs to be greater collaboration and humility across maybe not just Oklahoma, but with other states. And to what Uriah was saying earlier, we need to move more toward internationalism again and talk about what's working in other places, and just be like, just humble ourselves and ask for help. Like, what are some other models that we can work on? What else is being done well? What other school districts are doing things with success, and really opening it up for more collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. I saw in one of the mom groups where people said back when we thought everybody was going to have just the three options, either you go or you stay home, or you know, might be a hybrid or whatever. People were saying, if you can keep your kid home, and this is speaking to some people are really doing a great job of trying to work together, right? Everybody's not doing a great job of that, but some people are really, really working really hard to support the community. And so they were saying, you know, if you can keep your kid home and do virtual, do that, because there are some parents who can't. So let those parents send their kids to school and you keep your kid at home so that there's more ability to socially distance, for example. And it's scary that that's a place that we're at, where we're kind of trying to ask parents to like solve the community problem for everyone else. But I was encouraged that people were thinking of others in that way. Just thinking about the nitty gritty, normally during this time we would be picking up our own supplies, and parents would be picking up supplies for their kids to go back to school. And one of the big things that you always ask for, you know, bring some Kleenex boxes, bring some Clorox wipes, bring some hand sanitizer. They've re-upped on hand sanitizer and masks, but I haven't seen a Clorox wipe box since March. And so I'm like, you haven't either?
No.
And I've been looking. I'm like, okay, I'm on my last box, because luckily I like had kept several of the big tubs, but like I'm on my last one. Like, where do they live? And it's just it's interesting. It's an interesting world. As a last note, unless somebody has something else they want to jump on real quick, I would love it if everybody would just maybe, what do you think, if you had to hazard a guess as to how long we're gonna, like, as I asked my friend the other day, am I ever gonna see kids again? if you had to hazard a guess as to how long we're gonna be in this, like, let's go back to school, just kidding, we're not going back, let's go back, just kidding, when is it gonna stabilize? What do you think?
I would give it 2 years.
2 years?
And I know that's pretty extreme, but you know, we do have vaccines in work all over the world, but then you got to get those out to people, and you know, then you got to fight against the herd immunity crowd. You have a bunch of fights that is in front of what used to be super simple. You know, hey, go take the flu shot. We know it works. Okay, no big deal. Now you have people that just wants to question everything for questioning's sake. No data, no nothing, even though there's mountains of data against them. Yeah. So that's why I'm giving it about 2 years, because you got to get through the muck, and then people will finally be like, okay, this is beneficial to us. Let's go ahead and get this taken care of so everybody can go back to school without any problems.
Yeah.
I would say at least 1 year, before we're back to even a hybrid plan.
Yeah. So you don't think we'll see any kids this year in person?
I don't think so. That's me personally, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Sarah, what do you think?
Oh, Nadia, I'm going like week to week, my friend. I really am. I'm looking 1 week ahead. Like, what do I need to be to do to be ready for that, and just really being, I feel like I'm just being called to be incredibly agile and flexible, and yeah, and whatever's best right now, I'll do the best I can, you know.
Yeah.
Wish I knew.
No, I hear you.
But I'll tell you, there's a huge learning curve of how to teach online, and
you're teaching teachers, aren't you?
Yeah, and the way that I learned how to teach, and I know so many of you, is, you know, you set some protocol in motion, and students go into their groups and move to the side or lay on the floor, and you move around the room, and you watch their faces, and you listen to their voices, and you kind of sidle a conversation that maybe needs to get back on track, or you're listening to someone that just for something insensitive that you might want to like redirect, or, you know, we move around, and our way of teaching is responsive, you know. And in a Zoom classroom, when you put people into breakout groups, you can't see what's happening in those spaces. So how do you assess, you know, how do you assess the tone of things? How do you respond? How do you nudge? How do you nurture the conversations? And I think there's going to be a huge learning curve for how to do that in a really meaningful way. I wish I had an answer for that, but for me, that's going to be my task, my personal plan in the next, you know, 6 to 16 weeks, because we're going to be all online, is to learn how to do that better, you know.
So I'm curious to see what the numbers look like as far as positive cases 2 weeks in, like since mask mandates have been passed in different cities. Like most of Oklahoma doesn't have a mandate, but those places are less, you know, population dense. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. There's no quick return to school as normal. I don't see that coming. And I hope we can silver lining this. I hope we can stop doing school like the same way we've always done. Like, you do what you always done, you're gonna get what you done always got. Like, I forget how the saying goes exactly in the Southern terms, but doing this, like we can take this opportunity to stop doing school the way we have been. We can give students the options of like no longer have to force a kid to say, get a job or do school. Like we've got workarounds. We can do night school. We can, in a public school setting, right? We can say you don't have to choose that anymore. You don't have to choose staying home, taking care of your siblings, or school. You can do both. Like, I hope we find ways to make school better and more equitable. So students who are forced to, or the family needs the student to work, they can work and go to school. Families who need children to stay home and babysit, they can do that and go to school. It's not an either or. So I hope we can take this opportunity and sort of make school more equitable and like change the way we're doing it. Like let's start doing some 21st century school stuff more broadly. I know there's pockets of it, but
sorry.
Yeah.
I saw it in the back to school plan from Oklahoma Board of Education. There was a part in there about funding Saturdays, about there being funding for some Saturday school. And so can you imagine that might be a good fit for some families to, you know, to just put that off for Saturday, and the parents are off and they can be more supportive on Saturdays or something. So, and why do we have to start early in the morning? You know, maybe there's an evening kind of school that we can do. So I love the idea of reimagining it, Brecken.
I saw this phrase probably 2 years ago, and it was not related to schools, but I think it completely fits everything that we've been talking about. And it said, I hope I don't cry. This is such a stupid thing to like cry about, but I cried when I saw it the first time. It said, you can't raise your kids the way you were raised because the world you were raised for no longer exists. And I was like, that is true. Like, and the world, all of us on here, yeah, I know, right? All of us on here in our different age brackets, different, like the world we were raised for doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. So we have to reimagine. And I love Bracken's like silver lining. Absolutely. Let's make it positive. Let's make positive changes. Let's do things better, not just differently. Right? That's all I got. You guys are great. This was great. Thanks. I feel really good about this. I hope that the people who are online thought it was valuable. Feel free to leave comments even after. Later, watch the replay. It'll be up. It's not going anywhere. It'll be up on Tri-City Collective's YouTube page later on down the road. I don't know if anybody else is going to open themselves up for questions, but I can respond in the comments to things as time goes by. Like, just let us know. I had a great time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon.